Hello and welcome to Behind the Stitches, my series where I talk about the behind the scenes of my little quilt related business. Today's video, we are going to talk about my steps on how to write a quilt pattern. If you're interested, I would love for you to stick around and watch, give it a like if you like it, subscribe if you like it, and there's going to be lots more videos like this. And I also, on Fridays, I upload just regular fun quilty videos. So if you're not interested in the business stuff, don't worry. I also do tutorials and projects and all that sort of thing. Let's just jump right into it, okay? Because I am excited to share. I have 10 steps that I like to follow when writing my quilt patterns, okay? I have my list down here so I don't forget anything, and I have my computer over here where we're going to be looking at my computer also because I want to actually show you what I do and what I use. Let's go ahead and start with step number 1, which is ideation. Coming up with an idea, right? That is kind of the foundation. You can't really write a quilt pattern if you don't have an idea for one, right? What I like to do is I do several different things when I'm wanting to come up with a quilt pattern, though a lot of my quilt patterns, the ones that I've really liked and actually gone through with making, I didn't sit down to try to come up with something. It was just, I was just playing around and I made something cool. There's a few different ways that you can come up with ideas for a quilt pattern or a quilt block. So one is if you like to draw it down on a piece of paper. That's how they did it for centuries, you know. They didn't have computers, so all of these amazing quilts that we've seen, vintage quilts and stuff, they didn't have a computer to design that on. They drew it up or they just kind of winged it, right? That is a great way to come up with ideas for your quilt. You can also go on social media and different things and look at other patterns for inspiration, but I do not recommend just copying someone's pattern. Obviously, that's not good. I would not recommend copying anyone's pattern. Even if you think someone's pattern is really cool, don't do it, okay? Don't do it. Now, let's say I like to use Elizabeth Hartman as an example because I'm just a big fan of her patterns. If you like her patterns, but you come up with your own original idea that uses kind of her style as inspiration, that's fine. But don't come out with a block that's the same as hers, right? I just wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it. It's just icky. I wouldn't do it, you know? You don't want to steal other people's ideas. But gaining inspiration from someone is good, right? I would love if someone gained inspiration from one of my patterns. I would feel honored. Now, if they copied it 100%, not so much. But inspiration is good. Once you kind of have an idea of what you want to do, then we get into step number 2, which is the quilt design. So before you start writing a pattern or anything, at least this is what I do, is I like to come up with the full quilt design. I want to know what the full quilt is going to look like. And the way that I do that is I go into my computer on my quilt software, which is called EQ8. It's from the Electric Quilt Company, and it is fabulous. I love it. It's a lot of fun just to play in, and it's helped me create all of my patterns that I have. Let's hop on over to my computer. So this is what EQ8 looks like when you just open it, okay? So there are several different features of this software, and I'm not going to go over those in this video, okay? I'm just going to give you a brief idea. I'm going to show you what I've done for one of my patterns. We're going to be looking at Mom's Cozy Christmas today for this video. I thought that would be a fun one to show kind of the different steps of what I did. If you want to see kind of like a beginner look at EQ8, I did do a video on that. I will link that in the description box of this video if you want to check that out. I'd also like to do other videos on EQ8, so I just need to take the time to do that, right? And let me know if there's specific things that you want to know how to do in EQ8, and then I can make those specific videos, okay? But anyways, let's go ahead and open Mom's Cozy Christmas and see. I've just got, look at all of these. Just got a bunch of quilts that I've just designed and they're just waiting to be made into patterns. All right, so I've opened it up in the little quilt work table this is what it looks like in the software. So I've already put in the fabrics that I was using, and so I could really see what it was going to look like for my sample quilt. And let me scroll over here to our actual blocks. So for this quilt pattern specifically, I actually drew up these blocks in EQ8. I came up with the idea in EQ8 and did the design in the block work table. So let me kind of show you what that looks like. So this is what my block looks like on the work table. So I went ahead and came up here, first things first, and I already knew that I wanted my block size to be 12 inches square finished. So that's something that you should decide before you actually start designing, because then you can kind of figure out the sizes of the different pieces. So let's say if you just started with like a 6-inch starting block, but then you wanted to do this design, these pieces would be ridiculously small, right? I like working with small pieces, but I know a lot of people don't. So that's something to think about when you go in to making your block. So kind of decide what size you want your block and then go from there to actually drawing it up. All of these lines, I drew up this whole block. So all of these lines I made and just kind of came up with, well, how I wanted everything pieced, right? So I could have drawn a line here and had this also be a half square triangle, but I decided against that. I made it where you snowballed this piece instead of making that a half square triangle and this a square, if that makes sense. So you can really play around with how the piecing is going to go without actually using fabric and kind of wasting fabric. Yeah, so I really like doing that, and that's how you can kind of figure out sizing of everything. I would love to do way more in depth on how to actually draw up a block. And I should do a video about that. But for now, I just wanted to kind of show you what it looks like in the block work table when you draw up a block. And then once you have it all drawn up, then you come over here to this little plus sign, add to project sketchbook, and then you would add it and then be able to come back over to your quilt work table and then drop the block into the space. That's definitely a video we need to make. But anyways, so that's what that looks like. I'll show you what the pinwheel looks like real quick. So same thing, I drew it up. I knew I wanted a stocking. I had already had that idea. I wanted the stocking, and I wanted the stocking to have some kind of quilt block on it. I hadn't decided what yet, and I ended up going with a pinwheel because I just think that's really cute. That's how I kind of came up with this. And again, I knew I wanted that block to be 12 inches. So then I was able to figure out the sizing, and nothing was too terribly small. Some pieces are an inch wide, but that's not bad. That's kind of how I go about coming up with the idea. So a lot of times I'll just come up with the idea and think it, and then come into EQ8 and try to draw it up. Anywho, so that's how I design my quilts. I design them in EQ8. It's a really great software. If you're interested in it, I do have an affiliate link, and I do make a little commission off of it if you want to check it out. They're great. They have it on sale often. I'll keep an eye on it, and next time it goes on sale, I will send that out in my newsletter and let you guys know, because I think they do usually do like a 25% off sale regularly throughout the year. So I'll let you know. EQ8 is great for coming up with the design, but I will tell you, they do not give you instructions on how to actually make the block, which brings us to step number 3, which is writing the instructions, right? So I think that's kind of a misunderstanding about EQ8. They don't actually give you like the written instructions or the step-by-step how to make a block. Unless you make a block that's like foundation paper piecing, then they have like the pieces numbered, but those might not always even be correct. So you still have to kind of make the steps, right? And they definitely don't give you step-by-step instructions on how to make a pieced block. That's all on you. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to also bring you to my browser now and show you what I use to write my patterns. So step number 3 is writing your instructions, and I do that in Canva. I actually do the full design of the pattern and writing and making the illustrations. I do it all in Canva. So Canva is a website, or you can also get it as an app on your desktop or your phone or tablet or anything, but I just use the browser. And it is free to use, though I do pay for the paid version because it just has a bunch of extra features that I take advantage of because I use Canva for so many different things. I don't just use it for pattern writing. I use it for thumbnails for YouTube videos. I use it for product images for my website. I use it for all kinds of stuff. But it is free for if you want to try it out. Again, we're going to look at Mom's Cozy Christmas. This is my PDF version of it. I have separate files for the PDF and for the printed because I have different sizing for those. We'll talk about that a little later in this video. I have heard some people in the industry say that you have to use Adobe Illustrator because it's the industry standard. You really should be using Adobe products because it's the industry standard. And that very well might be. It might be the industry standard, but you do not have to use them. I don't, and I've been successful with my patterns. I've made beautiful patterns. They're great. They're easy to follow, and you can make a cool looking pattern in Adobe Illustrator, but if it's not written and made properly, it's still not a great pattern, right? So it's not, the tool that you use is not important for making a good pattern. What's important is, are your instructions easy to follow? Does it make sense? Are your cutting instructions correct? Are your fabric requirements correct? You know, that sort of thing. So I think a lot of people get hung up on the tool instead of the actual substance of the pattern. So that's my 2 cents. That's all I'm going to say about it. What I should do sometime, and if you guys are interested, let me know. But I should actually make a video and show the process of actually making the pattern, right? Right now, I'm just kind of giving an overview of the steps of what I take to make a pattern, but I really should. I could make like a longer video where I actually show making a full pattern and kind of all of the steps and actually follow the steps that I'm giving you and show you what I do. So when I am writing my instructions, and any of the information that I'm putting in my pattern, I personally like to assume a beginner is purchasing my pattern and they don't know what everything means. I don't assume that they know something. So I don't assume they know they're supposed to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I don't assume that they know what HST means. I like to, actually, let me show you here on the computer. So I like to give these little instructions. So all seams are sewn with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Fat quarter, aka FQ, equals an 18 by 22 pre-cut fabric. So I'm assuming they don't know this stuff, right? So I am putting it in there. So if they don't know, now they know. And if they know, well, they just scan over that and okay. Same thing with half square triangle. With the fabric, we're assuming the width of fabric is 42 inches for the fabric because a lot of quilting fabric kind of, the width can vary between like 42 to 45. So I just assume whenever I'm writing a pattern that it's the smallest. So there's plenty of fabric in the fabric requirements for the person to make what they want to make, right? I really like to keep that in mind through the entire process of writing a pattern. Make it easy and understandable, and just really break it down so anybody could follow the pattern, even if this is their first quilt. Though I would not recommend Mom's Cozy Christmas for a first quilt, but it is pretty easy once you know how to make the pieces. Again, we break it down. Let's skip these parts for now. I teach the 8 at a time half square triangle method, and I have all of the instructions here. And I also include diagrams. For me personally, I learn better seeing a visual representation of instructions. Just reading it in sentence form is not good for my brain. So I like to include as many diagrams and illustrations as I can in my patterns. If you don't want to do that, if you just want to do mostly written, you can do that. You also don't have to make like computer generated diagrams or illustrations. You can take good photos of each step. It doesn't have to look like everyone else's. There are lots of patterns that are very successful or pattern designers who are very successful that have photos of the steps instead of using these cute little computer generated pieces. That's something to keep in mind. You know, you don't have to do what so-and-so is doing to have a good pattern. Okay. It's really keeping in mind that this could be this person's first quilt or second quilt. You know, they could still be a beginner, but just try to break down those steps so it's easy for them to understand. I was actually just talking to someone that's wanting to write patterns, and she wasn't sure how to write instructions so someone else could make the block or whatever. And I told her, well, a good thing to do would be if you sat down with a notebook and pen, and you go to make your block, and each time you do something, write it down as a step. And that kind of breaks it down, because a lot of times us as designers, we're like, well, you just assume and you just kind of do it, right? But you have to remember, you have dreamed up and loved this block for a long time, and you've worked with it, you know everything about it. But someone else coming in, they don't know anything about this block. So they need you to kind of walk with them step by step and tell them how to make it. So that's a really good idea. If you're not quite sure how to break it down into steps, actually make the block and write down each step. Well, then I press the seams towards the left. All right. Then I added this piece to this piece. Then I pressed the seam, and those will be your steps for how to make the block. Then you can write them so they're a little nicer sounding than, then I did this, then I did that. But that's a really good way to think about it, right? You want it to be easy for other people to understand the block, not just for yourself. Because you're writing it for other people. You're not writing the pattern for yourself, right? While I'm writing the instructions, actually, I also do step number 4. So they're kind of connected, but step number 4 is make the illustrations and diagrams. So I personally like coming up with the little diagrams. It's helpful. I have always liked seeing them in patterns when I followed other patterns. That's what I do here in Canva. So everything in my patterns I have done in Canva. So it takes a little tweaking. Canva isn't as fancy as like an Adobe Illustrator, but it is great for a lot of quilting stuff. And again, I should make a full video on how I make the different pieces, but making the diagrams is very, very, very important to do it well, because that's going to visually be a huge help for people. The way that I make the diagrams is I come over to the elements section and I use shapes, and there's lots of shapes here. Most of the shapes that I use obviously are the square, which can also be turned into a rectangle. There's also triangles, lines. I use lines to make my stitch lines here. If you look, we've got little dotted lines for stitches. I use arrows to show this is what you do. Then you point the arrow, and this is what it'll look like after you do that. These are things to think about and kind of how you want your pattern to look like, right? All of these pieces, I just break it down. My patterns really don't have a lot of written instruction. A lot of it is just diagrams. Because again, for me, just visually seeing the thing is a lot easier than reading. So that's what I try to include for my patterns. I think it looks very nice. It looks professional and people love it. So that's what I do. I write the instructions and make the illustrations kind of at the same time. So that's steps 3 and 4. Then step 5 is I'll write the instructions and make the diagrams, and then I'll walk away for a day or two so it's not just fresh in my brain, so I don't just remember what I had just written. And then I'll come back and I will test the instructions and test the block to see if the instructions make sense. And I will only do what the instructions say. I don't start working ahead of time because I know how the block goes together. I follow the instructions and then I'll be like, I left something out here. There's a gap between this step and this step. What do I do here? Seems to really help break it down further, for someone that doesn't know the block. And that's a really good thing to do. So I would recommend doing that, testing the block and the instructions. And then that also helps make sure that your numbers are correct for your pieces that you have to cut and all of that. So testing the block is very important. Now, step 6, choose what size options you want to include. Do you just want this to be a one size pattern, or do you want to be able to include a smaller version and a larger version? Or do you want to do multiple sizes? Some of my patterns only have 3 sizes. Some of them have 6 sizes included. It just kind of depends on the pattern and kind of what I think most people would want to do. I really try, if I think that people will want to make a very small version or possibly a king, I try to include those because I like to give the people what they want, right? I want to be as accommodating as possible for people when I'm making patterns for them. Because again, the patterns are for them. Would I want to make a king size of this quilt? No, but someone else might. So I like to include those options for them. Once you have the size options figured out, then we come to the most fun. The most fun step is number 7. Figuring out the fabric requirements and the cutting instructions for each size. This is something that is very important. I think a lot of people stray away from making patterns because of this step, because they don't want to do the math. They don't want to figure out fabric instructions or fabric requirements and all of that for the different sizes. And I totally get that. For me, I have to be in the right mental state to be able to do the math. And I double check the math, and it's really important for it to be correct, right? When you design a quilt in EQ8, if you use EQ8, they will give you fabric requirements for that quilt, but a lot of times it is not correct. So I would not go off of what EQ8 tells you. Unfortunately, it's not correct. It is just a computer program, right? It doesn't know everything. Okay, it's making us use our brains, which is a good thing. Once you have your size options figured out, then going into figuring out fabric requirements and your cutting instructions. I would do cutting instructions first. So whatever size your pattern is focused on, I usually have my patterns focused on throw size. I use that kind of as the foundation. So I figure out the cutting instructions for that. So how many pieces of what fabric need to be cut to make this quilt. Then I figure out the fabric requirements for that size. That makes it a little easier to then be able to figure out the sizes going up and the sizes going down. But you really want to make sure that you are including enough fabric in the fabric requirements. I always round up to the nearest either quarter of a yard or third of a yard, kind of depending on what the measurements are, but I always round up to make sure that they have plenty of fabric. I'd much rather them have leftover fabric after making the quilt than not having enough, like being just short because, they made one cutting whoopsie or their fabric wasn't quite as wide as what we thought it would be. That's why I always assume the 42-inch width of fabric. So I always round up. I think that's a good practice to be in. And I think I even tell them in my pattern at the beginning. Yeah, I have a spot in my read before starting section that says, I always round up my fabric requirements to allow for cutting whoopsie moments. It happens, and that's okay. So I like to include that. It's a little buffer for them, right? And then they don't have to feel as stressed about cutting, like, oh no, what if my ruler slips and then I have to trim off that piece and now I'm not going to have enough fabric. So that's what I like to do. I like to include the fabric requirements in a nice little table, which also we make right in Canva with their table feature. Also, kind of along with this, I didn't include this in my list, but you can kind of figure out if you want to use pre-cuts or not, or include pre-cuts in the fabric requirements. That's something that usually, actually, when I go into designing a quilt, I try to think of, before I even get too deep into the design, do I want this to be pre-cut friendly? What kind of pre-cut do I want to be able to use with this pattern? So, like, for example, my tiny checkers quilt pattern, I went into designing that quilt designing that quilt pattern knowing I wanted to be able to use jelly rolls, right? Same thing with my mom's Cozy Christmas. I wanted to be able to use fat quarters. So I went into it knowing I wanted to be able to use fat quarters for that quilt. Same thing with my cake twist pattern. I went in knowing I wanted to be able to use layer cake. So I was able to adjust the size of the blocks and the pieces to make sure that I could use those pre-cuts, right? So I know that can be a little confusing, but you can do it. You can do it. And if you need to take a break from doing the math, take a break, If you need to, there are different companies that have ghostwriters and tech editors and all of that will check over your patterns to make sure things are correct in your pattern. So that's an option also. So don't feel like you're just lost and, oh no, I don't know. There are people that will come in and do a tech edit of your pattern to make sure that everything does make sense, everything is correct, and all of that. So that is an option. Those do cost money, obviously, but that is something out there if you're just really not confident in your math skills or just kind of making your diagrams and that sort of thing. So just keep that in mind, okay? Next step, number 8, is the actual fun step, which is making the sample quilt. So when you create a pattern, you really should make a sample quilt, right? It helps people see what the quilt looks like using fabric. It's not just a mock-up on a computer screen, but it's an actual physical quilt that they can see and kind of see how the pieces go together and all that sort of thing. So it's good to make at least one sample quilt. Even better if you can get testers that will also make sample quilts, and you can use their images to kind of promote the quilt and show, well, this is what this quilt looks like in this colorway, and this is what this quilt looks like in this colorway. So yeah, it's really cool if you can get testers. But yes, make a sample quilt. People want to see what the quilt actually looks like in fabric. And I have learned that because I tried releasing patterns with just the mock-up, but people want to see the actual quilt, So make sure you do that. This is kind of a bonus step, number 9. And it is using a booklet creator software to turn your PDF file into a booklet file that you can then print. So you only need to do this if you're planning on printing your own printed patterns. I think the majority of quilters send their quilt patterns out to be printed professionally. I did that once, and it was very expensive, and I wasn't a big fan of the result that I got. I haven't done that since. I print all my own patterns. I got a nice printer. It's done a great job. It's printed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of patterns for me, and it's still going strong. Then I'm able to physically check each pattern, make sure it looks good, make sure there's no smears or blurry anything. And that's worked out. But the program that I use, let me bring it back over to my computer. The program that I use for making my printed patterns is called Booklet Creator. And I will link this in the description box. I just found this. I was searching on how to create a booklet PDF. So what it does is, here, I will just show you here real quick. A block pattern from my July Block of the Month Club. If you want to join my Block of the Month Club, we have a lot of fun. It's only $5 a month, and we get to make fun blocks each month. But I'm just going to use this as an example, and I just upload the file into the software, and then I click Create Booklet. Let's see, let's just have it save on the desktop. Save. And there we go. So let me show you what it looked like before. So it literally just looks like a normal PDF, right? With 8 pages, 6 pages. Or that's our regular PDF. But then when I put it in the Booklet Creator, then it creates it in a booklet form. So now it's only 4 pages. And they're put together like that. So then when I print them out, I put them together and I fold them, and then it's a booklet. So it's very, very nice. It works. I love it. It's really cool. Really, really cool. So that is what I use to make my printed patterns. Again, this is such a brief overview. I think I should make a video on each one of these steps, really, to be able to deep dive into quilt patterns. But this is just kind of an overview of it. I've been talking for 45 minutes. And step number 10. Are you ready? You release it and hope for the best. Now, there's more to it than that. It really depends on how you're wanting to sell your pattern, right? So for me, I have my YouTube channel. That is my main social media. I rarely post on anything else. I really should post on the other platforms, but YouTube is my focus. So this is where I will make my announcements when I have a pattern, right? And I sell through my website. That's a whole other conversation we could talk about on where to sell your patterns. Do you have your own website? Do you try Etsy? Do you try to sell in store somewhere? There's so many options. I personally sell on my website. I also have only my PDF versions of my patterns are on Etsy. And I just figured, why not just put them over there and see what happens? And I do make sales over on Etsy, which is nice. So it's not a lot of income each month, but it's a little bit. Everything adds up, right? That's another conversation for another day. But when you release it, you really need to promote it, right? Because you spent all of this time putting in the work on this pattern, and now you really want people to buy it, right? You want it to get out there. You want people to buy it and enjoy it and share it and get other people to buy it and all that sort of thing. So there's this whole other side of it to trying to promote it and promote yourself. And social media has really become the way to market yourself, especially as a small business, especially if you're going to be a brand new quilt pattern designer. Social media really is the best way to get your name out there. Unfortunately, if you want to sell quilt patterns, I think you probably should try at least to get on social media and see what happens. I mean, see what happens. Look at me. I started this channel a little over 2 years ago now, like 2 years and a couple months. And I had no idea my channel was gonna grow to the size that it is now. And I'm able to sell my patterns, and I have a built-in audience that I can tell about my new patterns, that are excited about my new patterns and that sort of thing. So you just kind of gotta try it and see what happens, right? YouTube is a great platform, and I love it. So that was my, I think not so brief overview of the different steps to making quilt patterns. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like. If you have questions, let me know. If you want me to do like a full series and break down the steps into different videos, I certainly can. I just feel like I have like so much stuff I want to share that I don't know where to go. I don't know where to start, but I want to share it with you guys because I want to see other people succeed, and I'm not going to put it behind a paywall because that's not my goal. You know, the people that have created courses on this sort of thing, that was their goal. And they've been extremely successful, and they've made buku bucks on those courses, and that's great for them. That's awesome. But I would just like to share the bit of knowledge that I have with you guys, and if you're interested, let me know. Let me know what you would like to learn about, and I'm happy to share what I have, okay? I could even possibly do some type of Zoom call where people could come and we could just chat and I could answer questions and stuff. So let me know what you would be interested in. And again, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. I hope it kind of at least sparked something in you to want to try to start designing. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you for watching to the very end of this video, and have a beautiful rest of your day. Bye.